Well, hi there, everybody. Sorry I'm not able to make it there and have to kind of do this remotely, kind of scheduling conflict. I was hoping to be back in time for the presentation, but it doesn't look like I'm going to make it. So thank you for letting me join remotely all the way from Boston. I'll be flying back in tonight and taking a look back at kind of the history of games today and society and education before Juan and Todd kind of take over the show there and get into a little more detail about some of the ways we're using gaming in education and how kids are actually creating a lot of their own. So a little bit about me first. I am a former first grade teacher. I'm actually the director of innovation and digital learning right now in Eanes ISD here in Austin, Texas, and we're a one-to-one iPad district. And there I am right there on the right, in case you can't see me, that group of kids. And one of the other things that I'm known for is that I'm also the founder of an event called iPad Palooza, which is here in Austin, Texas. It's a learning festival that takes place June 17th, 19th, and we're entering our third year of that. So very proud of that. So looking back at games, and historically, when we look at games in society, a lot of things have shifted in society that maybe not have shifted in educational senses. But for the most part, things very much lined up in the early part of gaming design. Well, where a lot of games that were actually visible in society, like this one, would actually take place on the recess, on the playground, things like that, in the PE and in gym. Games like this, a little more commercially, were not quite as involved, although there were some educational versions of board games that did enter the market at some point. And then, strategies started to become part of things. You added a little bit of technology and you got, boom, you sink my battleship, like we see here. And so all of a sudden, we start to see technology kind of take its shape with games just in society, but then also how it's done and what it's helped us with. And of course, when this came out, it was kind of the end all be all of games. It was like, this is it. We've kind of reached the pinnacle of what gaming is. And it was really a simple process where someone just took a little paddle ball and twisted the knob and such that a ball would go back and forth and ping back and forth in the game called Pong. When this system came out, I love that it's called a video computer system. The Atari was really revolutionary in a lot of ways. And you see that it was also one of the very first places where you had something called multiplayer gaming, which is when you would invite your neighbor over and both of you would take this device and actually control the Atari at the same time. Pretty revolutionary at the time because a lot of the games at that point were really single user. And so that was in the early 80s, and we started to see a shift to where we thought, oh, okay, we can do a little bit more together and collaboratively. When it came to computer systems, the real computers, this of course was one of my favorites, a Commodore 64, which by the way is not worth anything nowadays, if you're interested. However, it was also one of the first ways that you could actually have not only a working computer system, but you would introduce kind of a gaming strategy to it. So it wasn't that single source like an Atari where you can only use it for certain things game-wise. This could actually be used as a productive device too. So we started to see a little bit of a mix at this point in the early 80s. And of course, Pac-Man, where I spent quite a bit of quarters in my youth, we started to see the real commercialization of gaming where it could actually be a location-based where you could go to places, and it became a social experiment too, in the sense that you could actually hang out with people while you played games in these video lounges, which still exist, a lot of them in retro, but you could still do a lot of this now. And then the home system really brought games to life, like Super Mario Brothers, where all of a sudden you have, again, kind of a hybrid access where it's a little more higher level than, let's say, you know, um, the original kind of Commodore 64 or Atari games, but you're still running into kind of some graphic limitations. But then again, it's at home and it's being produced in, in a quite a quick fashion and very popular. Um, Still, we kind of desired as a society to move toward more of a mobile platform. So, the Game Boys were introduced, and the pictures on these nowhere near what the original Ataris were. But the fact that it was mobile meant that you could take it anywhere with you. So no longer you're bound to the television at your house. And then the shift now to mobile phones, where we reached kind of the hybrid of everything, just like the Commodore 64, where you had productivity and gaming combined. Now you had a little bit of everything, communication tool, and everything else in the palm of your hands. And of course, games like Angry Birds become immediately popular because they're so quick, so easy to access, and they're just kind of fun and addicting in certain ways. Another favorite of my wife's is a game called Candy Crush, which lots of people probably know there in the crowd, but thought I'd mention it anyway. And so that evolution has kind of continued on in this terms of consumptive gaming and the fact that it's mobile and can be anywhere. The shift started really happening, we've seen in education just recently with games like Minecraft, where all of a sudden there is a creative element to it too. Of course, there's a destructive part too that kids love, especially middle school boys, it seems. But the shift had actually happened societally in terms of what the games are being played. Now the fact that there's a lot more ability to create and code, which Juan and Todd are going to talk about in a little bit. But this is a pretty powerful medium that we start to discover. So look, that was a look back at kind of the societal changes in games. But then let's look at how that's affected in education. So this is actually prehistoric dice from 5,000 years ago. This is pre like Plato, but it was thought that these were used for teaching probability, much like we do in the classrooms of today. Use dice, to actually as a teaching method. Well, so there was a lot of ideas that the game like dice could actually be brought into the classroom. So there's always this attempt, dating back 5,000 years even, to take modern everyday games and gambling in this case, and introducing it into the classroom in some sense. Of course, one of the classic games when it came to technology was the Oregon Trail, which had all sorts of great ways to die from the 1800s. Here's a little video snippet of what that looked like. And so, the wagon would load up, you'd kind of get your chance, you'd press spacebar to continue, and you'd go through and make your choices, check your supplies, look at your map, make sure you kind of had everything. You'd see how much food you had, how long you could make it before catching amoebic dysentery. And then, of course, you'd get alerted to switch out discs whenever you needed to. And a lot of simple commands, N or Y, if you want to go forward or not. Then looking back educationally, we see games like this, kind of tie into the fact that we try to take a modern game like Mario Brothers and turn it into typing. This is actually how I learned how to type when I was in 8th grade. So Super Mario Types was a big, hit of mine, kind of an early way of getting the modern societal games involved in the classroom. Companies like Reader Rabbit would come out, learning company would come out with games like Reader Rabbit as a way to kind of have this immersive world where all of a sudden you could walk around and you could see these really, beautiful graphic interfaces as ways to kind of designing and learning. But again, these games were kind of separate. They're one-off. They weren't really a part of societal gaming in the sense they were just taking place in the educational realm. With Second Life, there was a real attempt at having this kind of virtual online world. And it took off a little bit in colleges where you could kind of wander around and actually visit these places online. And there's still somewhat of an existence of this, but it didn't really take off again in the worldwide web in terms of the spread of where it would actually take place. So kids, would participate in Second Life, but they're just, it never really stuck. And so it was a good kind of attempt there at the virtual world, and still, like I said, exists. That brings us back to Minecraft, which I bring it up again as a tie into this because this is where we've seen this really big crossover. It's kind of like we're at that point in education where no one's no longer making games like an educational version of a regular game. With Minecraft, you take the exact same engine and you're able to create these massive worlds. Like here's an example of 2,500 people in a community creating the entire world of Game of Thrones. And so they spent a massive amount of time on this, but together they're able to create this to scale these beautiful worlds. Within the show Game of Thrones. And so all of a sudden we see that with gaming, there's been a lot of shift in terms of what's happening. Here's a great version here. This is actually another idea, another use of Minecraft, but this is actually a student, and you can't hear him, but he created this Roman bathhouse as part of a history project, and he's using it to kind of describe in Latin the different parts of the Roman bathhouse. Now, this is a project that normally, if you'd have just done this in a normal classroom experiment, it would have been, or project, it would have been, here's some slides about a Roman bathhouse, and I'm going to tell you about them in Latin. But instead, this student has taken the time to actually design this by hand as a 9th grader, and he's actually reading in Latin as he travels through this world. It's pretty amazing to think about how that's kind of shifted, and he's been allowed to bring this medium into his learning. And so we see that with gaming, all of these features that have happened throughout the actual societal world in terms of the fact that they're now social, mobile, they're always solving problems and collaborative, teach a lot of persistence, and then really that creativity piece that we see there at the end, that is a key part of what we see games going forward in the educational space. So in that look back, kind of tying to the fact that there's a lot of shift in society in terms of there's always been this one-off version of things when it comes to educational gaming, but now we're starting to see a real shift in the fact that kids are able to create their own spaces. And with Scratch and the Hour of Code and things like that, we're starting to notice that we're starting to take a lot more ownership of the actual content in terms of students, rather it's just stuff that we buy off the shelf and put in the computer. So I'm excited to hear what Juan and Todd say about it as well. And again, sorry I couldn't be there, but thank you all for having me, and I'll hope to answer some questions here at the end.